Hello, everyone, and welcome to Social Movements for Tuesday, January 21st. I apologize for not wanting to go out in the negative sub-zero degree weather, but I hope you appreciate that I'm giving you the break off from it too. Here, instead, we're going to do a little lecture online, and I am going to ask you to do an assignment that will be due sometime from now, a little over a week, I believe. So let's get into what you read for today. The book chapter that you were reading was actually provided for you because I didn't think we should read an entire book in persuasion theory. After all, that's not the main focus of this course, but it is a focus of this course. So in this book chapter, you probably saw 5 theories or so that you already know. And if you don't already know them, hopefully this gave you enough information that you can say that you understand how traditional persuasion theory works. Most of these they come from what's known as the rational world paradigm. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean that they come from linear thinking. They come from the idea of cause and effect. They come from the proposition that we live in a world where logic is the answer to questions that we have, whether they're research questions or social questions. Whenever we use the scientific method, we are engaging in what's known as the logical world paradigm. So your question might be, well, what's the alternative to that? And the answer is that the alternative is the narrative paradigm. So here's what we're going to do. I'm not going to reiterate the book to you or the book chapter that I provided to you. I think that's a waste of time, both mine and yours. If we had met in class today, I would have asked you to tell me if you had heard of some of these, and I would have asked you to tell me what you know of them. Since we're not meeting together, I'm actually going to have you do something a little bit different that I'll explain at the end of this video. For now, I would like us to talk about where the narrative paradigm comes in. Now, if you'll recall those 4 paradigms that we had talked about way in the beginning of class, last week, we had talked about those 4 paradigms of how we think about communication and research. Where does the narrative paradigm come in? Well, some people would argue that it comes in at the point of the interpretivist or the rhetorical or the critical perspectives, sort of the modern and more postmodern ideas about how we come to know and learn things and how we determine what is true or not. The reason I bring this up is because you may have realized that traditional persuasion theory is usually not very helpful for social movements. It's helpful for persuasion. If we're just studying a single message of persuasion, then it's good for that. However, if, for example, you want to study how a movement develops and what the sort of linear projection of that is, or the chronological timeline of it is, or what stages it goes through, I don't think those persuasion theories are going to be very helpful to you. What will be helpful to you is the narrative paradigm. So what is the narrative paradigm? Does it say that the logical world paradigm doesn't exist and that's nothing? Of course not. What it says is that there's a different way of looking at the way we reason and the way that we find truth. What is that? It's through stories. We tell stories. Now, remember, one of the things I said on the first day of class was that being involved in a social movement is about your identity. It's about the personal and how you want to be viewed and seen. So we join certain groups as part of our identity. It says something about who we are. And therefore, the movement becomes a part of our story. I was reminded of this today when, actually last night, when I was talking to some people about doing some crowd fundraising, and it's for me. So it feels very selfish and I'm having a hard time doing it. But is it an important thing? Yes, it's an important thing. Will it increase my quality of life? Absolutely. But it's still hard to ask people for help. And somebody said, well, I don't understand why you have a hard time asking for help. You run these nonprofits all the time. You're always asking for money or you're always asking for support in one way or another. I don't understand. When we are part of a group, when our identity isn't so individualized and there's not a hyper focus on who we are as individuals, but instead that we are affiliated with doing something for the greater good, the common good, something bigger than ourselves, we're more likely to feel attached to that and feel more confident in that and to practice all of the different varied ways of persuasion. When we're advocating for ourselves, and this is not a good thing, when we're advocating for ourselves, we sometimes forget the very basic rules of persuasion and what persuasive messages need to get to our audience. I don't know what the psychology is behind that, but a lot of us, I think it's about our identity of I want to help, I don't want to have to be helped. And that's a very difficult place for us to be. In our story, and this is where my personal experience comes in, I was asked, please write a story, a personal story, a persuasive story about your journey that indicates why you would need this help from, hundreds or thousands of individuals. And I really thought about that for a long time. And I thought, I don't have a good story. Well, isn't part of my job to come up with a good story? Isn't that part of what we do? Of course it is. And when you're working with a social movement that maybe one day will become a 501c3, or when you're advocating for a nonprofit, whatever it is that you're doing in order to get collective social action, you have to understand what the story needs to be. Not just to be persuasive, but to be persuasive to your particular audience. How do we evaluate narrative then? I mean, it's easy to, identify research questions and to come up with a method, even if it's critical. We could come up with a way of looking and evaluating data that we might get. But how do we do that with a story? So I'm going to give you some information here, and you're going to have to trust me on it after I've studied a great deal about metaphor, about simile, about storytelling, and about what the narrative needs to do. And I can tell you this, the narrative that we tell has to have two very important components. One part is what's known as fidelity. The other part is what's known as coherence. What is fidelity? Fidelity is the idea that the story you're telling rings true with other things that people have experienced in their life, that there's some identification or some connection there to experiences that we've had in our life. So it rings true. It makes sense. There is something about the story that is relatable. The second component, which is coherence, just means that the story needs to hang together, that there needs to be some logic in the story. And I don't mean like a specific kind of logic or deductive logic or anything like that. I just mean there has to be an internal structure to the story that makes sense. So essentially, your story has to make sense and have a good point, and that point has to be relatable. So one of the things that we do is we say, hey, you know what? I feel that we all share something at the level of just being human. So those fires in California, for example, that people are trying to raise funds for, they're trying to raise resources for, they're trying to get volunteers for. How would we feel if there was a major fire or a major natural disaster? I'm just going to go with, I don't know, let's say hypothetically a tornado that rips a town apart and destroys it. What would we need? And isn't it easy to say, hey, I've been through some disasters in my life. I've seen other towns in the world that have needed help. I've volunteered before. Any of those things that we've said, well, that's connection. That's identification, right? And so when you hear about the fires, people will say, we understand we don't have a lot of money right now. Just donate $5 or $10 and you could help blank. And we're doing this on the most basic human level. These people are without homes. They are without food. They're without anything but the clothes they have on their back if they were lucky enough to escape, right? It's pretty easy to identify with people on that level. And it makes a lot of sense that they would need help and support. That is the narrative that every single social movement tells. Here's the problem that we have, or the situation that we have, and everyone can relate to it for one reason or another, so won't you help too? So the narrative paradigm, instead of looking at some sort of structure or some sort of test or even some sort of interpretation of what we think might or might not be happening, instead we look at the story. We look at the plot of that story. We look at the characters in that story, but we look for coherence and fidelity, the two most important things. So whenever I talk about persuasion in social movements, I tend to look at it from more of, you've already heard, I'm more of the interpretive, rhetorical, critical area. I'm much more from the narrative paradigm than I am from the logical paradigm when it comes to trying to understand social movements. And as we go through this time together through the course of the semester, you're going to realize that there's not a whole lot that is super logical about how social movements work, how they form, how they fail, how they succeed. Yes, we could take apart individual messages and look for their effectiveness, but that's not going to tell you about the whole of the social movement. So the social movements the persuasion theories that you've read about are a very limited look at how we might determine the success or failure of a social movement. And we need to think about other ways to look at how a social movement might succeed or fail. And we're going to do that over the next couple of weeks. So now that you've read that chapter, the assignment that I'm going to give you, that I believe I said is actually due, I'm trying to check on my computer right now, is due on January 28th by 11:59 at night. I would like you to do what I call a persuasion theory redux, which is that you pick any of those persuasion theories that are in the book or even a different one, go out and find a few more articles or book chapters that explain it. Write for me a 2 to 3 pager that just says, here's what this social movement is, or social movement. Wow, I'm having a rough time here. Here's what this persuasion theory is. Here's how you might study a movement with this persuasion theory. And I want you to be specific. How is it I'm going to study a social movement with this persuasion theory? And break it down as to the most simple and the smallest way that we can think about a social movement and utilize that theory to determine its success or failure. I'm saying this with a little bit of side eye because it's not as easy as I'm making it sound for sure, but it's not so difficult that I don't think you can handle it. Just find 1 or 2 other sources besides the book chapter I provided to you. And by sources, I mean external sources, not textbooks. You might have to, I don't know, do the Google thing, hopefully Google Scholar, or, look on the library website for the search engines that will provide you with academic journal articles. I want you to demonstrate to me that you understand one theory, whatever theory you want, one persuasion theory that we can use in this class, potentially, that you can demonstrate to me that you understand completely. This is worth 100 points, so it's not nothing. It's about 10% of your grade in the end, but it's our first assignment, and I want to get us started off on the right foot, starting with persuasion. Then very quickly, we're about to move into how social movements work and what they look like and how we define them and all of the fun things that I'm sure you're looking forward to doing. You will have another reading assignment coming up. It is not posted at the moment. There is another assignment coming up in the first week of February, but that is going to be just a little short couple paragraph essay that doesn't require any external research. So you can look forward to that. On your syllabus, it's very clear. In the meantime, the reading I will assign to you will be posted by Thursday, but you don't have to have it read by Thursday. I'll want you to have it read by the following week. Okay, everybody, I hope you stayed warm. I hope this gave you time to read if you didn't take the chance before class. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, complaints, threats, whatever, I am going to be online available off and on between now and about 4:30 p.m. So feel free to hop onto the Zoom link that I sent to you all in the announcement. In between, I'm kind of doing these little lectures for a couple of different classes. So if I'm not on there, give it a few minutes, I'll be right back. And I will talk to you all, if nothing else, on Thursday when it's a little bit warmer outside.